Welcome to the Visually Hidden Selects podcast, where we discuss an independent approach to the art of cinema and explore the subtext of various featured films. My name is Peter O'Brien, and I am an independent filmmaker, author, and musician.
My name is David Bendler. I'm a film and stage actor and a pop culture enthusiast.
I'm Anne Milleville, a French screenwriter and producer.
This week's VHS selection is Superman the Movie from 1978, directed by Richard Donner, and starring Christopher Reeve, Gene Hackman, and Marlon Brando, and featuring Margot Kidder, Ned Beatty, Jackie Cooper, Mark McClure, and Terrence Stamp. It's kind of like a who's who of character actors, really. You know, even right down to the stars, save for Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando. I mean, Christopher Reeve, of course, became a star from this film, but at that point, he was nobody. We're going to dig into that a little bit later, but before we do, if you have not seen Superman the Movie, I strongly recommend that you head over to the Visually Hidden YouTube channel, subscribe so you don't miss any future recommendations, check out the VHS episode on Superman the Movie, then watch the movie and come on back to the podcast. You might want to check out Superman 2 because I have a feeling we're going to dig a little into that as well. So here we go. Superman the Movie has been there pretty much forever. I mean, I'm born in the 80s, so of course, yeah, it's always been there. But that was really the only game in town insofar as superhero films were throughout the 80s. You know, there were some here and there, but especially as we got on in the 80s, we got The Punisher and, of course, Batman 89. But Superman was really the only superhero franchise as far as films went for a long time. And so he was just always there. And while the sequels kept it alive and kept it relevant, I feel like a lot of it really rests on the shoulders of this first film.
I knew a little bit about Superman before through the TV shows. I watched Lois and Clark in the 90s and Smallville, I think that was the name of it. It was in the early 2000s. I wasn't a big fan. I know it was from comic books, but we don't really read comic books here. I mean, we read the French ones. One of my friends dragged me to a theater one day to see Batman versus Superman. I guess you have the same title in English. It was a Zack Snyder movie. And I hated this movie. My goodness, this movie, the scenario is so bad. I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but when you think that the two guys are fighting and they stop fighting to death because they realize their mothers have the same name, you're like, oh my God, people are paid to write that, you know? I was really surprised about this movie. But that's my first impression about Superman, you know?
I feel so bad for you.
What a shame.
Oh my goodness. Gee whiz.
Yeah,
Zack Snyder as the ambassador. Holy shit.
Not a good situation.
Once they brought Zack Snyder into the Superman universe, it was really just downhill from there. I mean, that dude, he really should not be allowed near a camera. He's in that Rob Zombie class of filmmaker where he's just fucking perpetually 13 and can't direct his way out of a fucking paper bag. Let's leave it there.
But I was curious to watch these movies because Christopher Reeve, even if I didn't really know him as an actor before, I heard about him and I saw him as Superman, so I really wanted to see the movie for real. And unfortunately, the only thing I knew about this guy is the tragic fate. I mean, the fact that he had a horse riding accident and he was tetraplegic. So I wanted to see him before, you know, so it was a pretty good surprise. A great actor, really, definitely. I was really surprised that I found the movie amusing because, you know, I told you many times, sometimes we don't have the same humor in France and in America. And yeah, surprisingly, I had fun watching it. So that's a good point, but too long. This movie is way too long. You know what I'm thinking about a movie that lasts more than 2 hours. Frankly, the first part, I think not really necessary to talk about the first, to have the first hour in the movie. You probably disagree on that, but the first hour for me, flashbacks, you know, you should have used flashbacks instead of having this context at the beginning of a movie. Really, it's too much information. You don't get really the point. That's my opinion.
Well, you're looking at it from today's perspective and point of view, and you got to think about it like there were no superhero movies before this, really. Like realistically, there were here and there, and there was TV movies and TV shows. He was present, but he didn't have a big cinematic reach, and so for the audience, they really wanted to bring everybody into this world of Superman. So whether you had read the comics or not, you wouldn't be lost. You would know who this character was, what he was about, what his story was. And so this is like the prototype for the superhero movie and for the superhero origin story. When you look at this and then look at like Spider-Man from 2002 with Tobey Maguire, it's like, they have to establish it. And after a while, superheroes became so immersed in our culture that they just kind of like, okay, everybody knows who these characters are now. We've done the origin story thing. Let's just jump right in to action. Let's just get to the heart of the adventure now, because everybody knows who these characters are. They have kind of almost done away with the origin story. But this film, I think, really does a superb job of unfolding that story for somebody like my mother or my mother-in-law or a grandmother, somebody who is not really keen on Superman. They can follow this story of this alien and see everything that they've gone through. And in 2.5 hours to get from Krypton to Lex Luthor going to jail, it's like, that's a big flippin' story right there. And to do that in 2.5 hours, I think it moves pretty swiftly, Anne.
To cover that much ground so solidly and succinctly, one or two little scenes of him in high school, boom, you got the point, you got the picture, you saw the lay of the land, how things are going to go down. And Richard Donner is really a fantastic director. And to cover that much ground and to have it come off so clean and not feel so choppy, I think is a testament to him as a filmmaker.
All things considered, the special effects in this film, I think they hold up pretty well when you consider that the film is approaching 50. It's not what it is today in like Iron Man. When Iron Man's flying, like, yeah, that looks awesome, but that's in a computer. Like, this is actually Christopher Reeve doing those actions, and it's just incredible. And like that first shot when he's in the Fortress of Solitude, and it's the first time he's in the suit and he flies by the camera, you can't see the wires. It's incredible. And the distance that he covers in that shot, like that is a very intentional shot to like show the audience this is real, this guy is real, take him seriously. And I think they completely accomplished and achieved that goal with that shot in the film.
One of my favorite shots to this day in this movie is right after he saves Lois with the helicopter. They land on the roof, and when he flies off and waves goodbye to her, it's one of my favorite shots in the whole film because it looks so fucking real. I feel happy when I watch this movie.
I agree on the special effects. The phrase to promote this film is "you're gonna believe that a guy can fly." This film is incredible when you think it was in the 70s, and nowadays the Superman movies, they don't do better than that. I mean, that's as cool as it was in the 70s. So pretty amazing. And the other special effects are pretty good for the time period. The special effects are more realistic in the first than in the second. That's my opinion. But also, I wanted to talk about something I really loved in this movie, and maybe that's why you're so enthusiastic about this movie. The dialogues, they're pretty funny, actually, and you have very touching moments and funny moments between Luthor and Otis, and between Lois and Clark. I think Lois and Clark, it's more because you know that Clark is Superman and she doesn't know. But really, you have moving moments and funny at the same time. So it's something that you want to rewatch. It makes you want to rewatch this film just for that, and it makes you be enthusiastic and excited about the movie. I guess it's not just a movie, just a storytelling. It's an atmosphere, and you want to be part of it when you watch it.
It really achieves the goal of bringing the comic book world to life. When you look at this film, there's something about the lighting and the composition and the production design and even just the colors that they're using within the shot. It really just brings the pages of the comic book to life in a way that is very loyal and very accurate, as opposed to other films, especially more contemporary films where it has this kind of like washed out, desaturated look. Like this one is like very, very vibrant, but the lighting is just, it adds like this like little bit of softness to it. It's not like super sharp, so it almost has that print page tangibility on the frame itself. It's kind of insane.
Yeah.
How well it was translated to the motion picture medium from the comic book pages.
This movie has like a warm glow on every frame, and it makes it feel completely different than any other movie I've seen. And all the colors on Superman, they pop so much, and it just makes him seem larger than life.
Because he is.
Yeah, he is. And the other thing about this film that I love so much is all of the different artistries that are brought in. You have all the wire techniques, and there's crane techniques. There's the paintings in the background for some of these shots. There's the miniatures. There's the double layered photography. There's so much stuff that goes into this to get that end product, and man, it all works. And it takes. That's why I always said Richard Donner is one of those unsung heroes in the director world, because he really takes all those different mediums inside the filmmaking artistry and weaves them together, and this is the product that you get.
He's bringing in every department. Every kind of effect is being utilized to achieve the illusion that this story requires. So there's matte paintings, there's models, there's trick photography, there's rear projection, there's all of these different things coming together, and that they're orchestrated and executed to the best of their ability in that time. Like if you look at this movie right now today, like let's say you just like wake up from a coma and you go and you watch all of the MCU and the DCU movies, and then you watch this one, and it's gonna, you're gonna see flaws in some of the effects. But if we didn't have those effects in this film, we wouldn't have the effects we have today. And so historically, this film is a milestone in the evolution of not only superhero movies, but also just blockbuster movies. Like this movie, Star Wars, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind are really the kickoff of the fantasy genre in terms of what can be achieved in film and in cinema. Without these movies, we wouldn't have Avatar at all. Like that would still be a dream that exists only between James Cameron's ears. Like it's these filmmakers that decided, like, you know what, we're going to push it to the limit.
Yeah.
And we're going to see what we can do, and we're going to think of the impossible, and then we're going to actually achieve it.
It can't be overstated how big this movie was to film and into a genre that didn't even exist yet. And I found out recently that Kevin Feige, who's the head of the MCU, was the protege of Richard Donner. So, I mean, right there in itself, that is massive. I mean, that ushers in the rest of the future of what these movies would become, a blaze a trail for a lot of different things in the genre, and created the genre, basically.
The music they use in the first one, and I guess it's the same in the second one, is really emblematic. I mean, even if I didn't know the movie, you know the music. So John Williams is really known for that. I guess he made other movies music. You gonna?
The music is an equal participant in the presentation of this story.
It's a character, for sure.
Yeah, it's doing just as much as the characters, as the writers, as the story, as the dialogue, production design, effects, everything. Like it's like right in there, helping to lift this story up into our imaginations. And it really is kind of a standout piece for me in John Williams' catalog, and that's saying quite a lot.
No, I agree 1000%. John Williams makes every film he's a part of better, and I dare say that the films that he has been a part of would not be as successful had his music not been in it. His music elevates everything. There's a heart and soul in it. His music makes everything jump off the screen. It's a beautiful marriage he creates with the images that he is scoring for.
What is memorable also in this movie is the cast, because having Marlon Brando in those kind of movies, I didn't expect that. He's such a great actor, and I don't know if it's common to do that, but in my country, when you have such a reward like an Oscar, you don't play in popular movies. And that's an example that you can do it, definitely, because it brings a lot in the story, in the Krypton universe. He has such a presence, charisma, and such a pleasure to see him again in a movie. So really surprising, but in a good way.
Who else was really going to be Jor-El? Who else was going to be able to like pull that off. Let's be honest, so that's a credit to the filmmakers, to the Salkinds, and to Richard Donner. It's like, okay, like all that stuff is at the beginning, so we want to set this film off on the right note, right? We want to start on the good foot. Let's get Marlon Brando in here because everybody is going to take him seriously, and then they're going to start to take the film and the character seriously. So that's a little bit of just filmmaking genius right there. Is like, give him whatever he wants because he's giving us more.
Yeah.
He doesn't realize it, but he's actually giving us more than we're ever going to give him. And Gene Hackman had also won the Oscar for French Connection. So right there, it's like they're hanging the title of Superman on the names of these supporting characters. And that was just brilliant.
Yeah.
What was more brilliant was getting Christopher Reeve to play Superman, because they were throwing around names. They wanted Dustin Hoffman for Superman. The dude is like 5 feet tall, skinnier than me.
Yeah.
And they wanted him for Superman because he was a good actor and he was a popular actor, but he wasn't Superman. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you had Arnold Schwarzenegger campaigning hard, but he had some limitations to overcome in his professional career at that moment. And they were so lucky to find somebody like Christopher Reeve to play Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman. It's a triple character, really. I know I said it's a dual character, but it's really because you have Clark Kent, you have Superman the hero, but then you have Kal-El, who is his true self. And that's the character you get to see in the Fortress of Solitude, and that's the character you get to see talking to his father through the crystals. It's a very dynamic character that not everybody or anybody can do just because you can memorize lines or hit your marks or, be physically impressive. It's more than that. And he had it, and they were lucky.
One of my favorite moments in that movie, and I got teary-eyed watching it this time, again, for the 1,000th time I've seen it, when he pulls Lois from the wreck. And that the quietness that's happening there, it's sinking in that he failed. And when he puts her on the ground and he just so gently realizes her head's going to touch, and just the tenderness he has there. And then a split second later, that fury when he flies towards the screen is probably my favorite moment in the film. Just you feel that when you see his face, you believe it. His eyes, you feel it. There's never a moment of that performance where you're like, nah, he's a fucking actor on a string. No, he's that guy.
He really, really was. He's Superman forever and a day. And now a word from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Visually Hidden Selects. If you're looking for a spoiler-free recommendation of a classic film with professional analysis and insight, check out Visually Hidden Selects, exclusively on the Visually Hidden YouTube channel.
With every great hero needs a great villain, and I think Gene Hackman, you watch this performance, he's just having so much fun. He's just so good in this role, just having a great time. And him and Ned Beatty, it's such a great little comedy team. Ned Beatty's got so many great little moments in this, so many great little choices. Otisburg.
He's such a great character actor. Ned Beatty, we'll come back to Gene Hackman. Ned Beatty is he's such a great character actor because he can go from Deliverance and squeal like a pig boy to Otis, and then he just turns up in all of these places, and he's always believable, he's always genuine, he always delivers, and he's always that character. He's never Ned Beatty, he's always that character. And Gene Hackman, well, he's a star, sometimes he's Gene Hackman, let's face it, and sometimes Marlon Brando he's just Marlon Brando, and he's you can't see past the brightness of the star that they are. That doesn't mean that they're not delivering and that they can't carry it. They can. But when you look at the movie and you look at the frame, that's Gene Hackman and that's Otis.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can say it.
No, and it's not a slight. That's why he got the role. That's what the role called for. It's any little Gene Hackmanisms.
Well, and I think one of the things about Lex Luthor as a character is Lex Luthor, he's a narcissist, first and foremost. He has a narcissistic personality bordering on, being a psychopath because he's going to annihilate half a coast of people to get some prime real estate. But all that aside, even just the costumes that he wears, the elaborate wigs that he has, the luxury subterranean lair that he inhabits. He's he's clearly not stable, and I think Gene Hackman, he just brought a lot of fun and the right kind of energy to the character. He's not necessarily my favorite Lex Luthor, but in this film, I think he's the best possible Lex Luthor there ever could have been.
One of my favorite parts of this movie always is when Superman brings him and Otis into the prison, and who is he? And he rips off the wig and he says, "Lex Luthor, the greatest criminal mind of our time." Never fails to crack me up. It was really great casting choices by Richard Donner. I don't think there was anybody in there who's like, "Oh, that doesn't really fit." Even Miss Teschmacher, such a small part but believable.
Yeah, I wanted to take a minute to talk about her, because for me, the character has no point, really. Imagine the story without her, it would be the same. The only thing she does, she saves Superman, but she sexually assaulted him. Really. I feel so bad for this guy. He was dying in the pool, and what she does, she kisses him. Well, he didn't give his consent,
She brought him back to life. She revived him.
No, she abused him.
She brought him back to life. She was breathing air into his body to get him going.
No, he was shocked, poor guy. He said, "Why did you kiss me?" I feel bad for him. No, really, this character has no point for me.
He just didn't have any time to go to HR. He had to go get the missiles.
Well, I think in a true supervillain fashion, Lex, he has her hanging around for a number of reasons, some of which I don't think we need to get into, but she's a distraction. He utilizes her when he's changing the codes on the missiles. Like, she is a distraction, and he knows that he can utilize her to kind of get by on certain things. It's a classic decoy, to have a voluptuous woman in your ranks. You can send her in to a male dominated situation, and all of the dopey guys are going to be looking at the big chested woman with the pretty face, and then you can sneak behind those guys and get whatever you want. So he's just utilizing her as a tool in his diabolical toolbox, really, is what Miss Teschmacher's function is. And then when she betrays him, turns on him, and helps Superman, it's kind of her character standing up, against him, and like, okay, yeah, I'm not just here for your pleasure or your amusement or your needs. Because that's why he's late to the San Andreas fault, because he gets that first missile up and away, and then he goes to get the second one, but it's already struck. So then, and that's what happens to Lois. So yeah, it's really, I think she has a very deliberate function in a number of different ways throughout the story. I think if we took out Miss Teschmacher, it would be a different story, and it wouldn't be as interesting or engaging or rewarding, really, because of her affection for her mother in New Jersey, and then the bargain that she strikes with Superman for saving him. It's like, now we're raising the stakes, and it's like double jeopardy, because now, all right, is he going to uphold his promise to this person who helped him, or is he going to go save the people he cares about? And so it creates conflict for Superman that drives the third act and the twist of this story. So I might say Miss Teschmacher is the most important character. This movie should be called Teschmacher, the movie.
She's almost the audience at certain points, because when Lex says these ridiculous statements like, the greatest criminal mind of our time, and look at this, this empire I've built, and she's like, this empire underground, and like, so like she's calling him out on his bullshit and kind of all the stuff that the audience is thinking.
Yeah, she's kind of the voice of reason. In a way.
Like why do people, why so many people have to die for the greatest heist, in the history of the world, and she calls him out on all those different things. Have we changed your mind on Miss Teschmacher? Have we sold you on
not. No, for me, she's just the stupid naive girl that finds interest in being with Luthor, and she just wants to save Superman because, for once, her interests are not with Luthor but with saving Superman, and she's even enjoy the moment because she without any consent she kissed a guy. I mean, I don't like this character really. I don't see the point. But okay, you said she's a distraction, but for me she was a distraction in the scenario. That's all. She's another woman character for guy for the audience. That's all for me. That's all she is.
Well, she was in Playboy, covered in blue
Oh, you
paint and
see,
a big
so
S.
I'm sorry to say that, but for me, Margot Kidder, she's not the best Lois Lane I know. For me, the best one is Terry Hatcher. I know you're gonna hate that. For me, I understand that.
Well, listen. I like Terry Hatcher as Lois Lane for a whole other reason.
Oh, okay. But okay, so you agree with me. But yeah, I understand that they want to show that she's an independent woman. She's a good journalist and everything. I understand that, but for me, she's kind of vulgar. She's kind of not sexy at all. And when you have a guy like Superman in front of you, you want someone sexy. And especially the fact that she's smoking, for me, it's really not sexy at all. Maybe in the 70s it was, but yeah, I don't really like her as Lois Lane. I have nothing against her performance. She's a great actress, but the character itself, I think she's not the best to apply for this job.
Well, at the time, I mean, there's screen tests are available, and I mean, Stockard Channing was brought in, Brooke Shields was brought in, Leslie Ann Warren was brought in, and all great actresses in their own regard. But the chemistry between her and Reeves is undeniable. And if you watch the Richard Donner cut, they use a screen test to fill a gap for a scene they didn't get to film. It's dynamite. I mean, even it's a little unpolished, but for a screen test, dynamite. And I think that's what it was. They had the chemistry. And I bought when she was in love with him. I bought when she was hanging from the helicopter, scared to death for her life. I bought when that she's a hard nosed career woman and she like wants to get the story. I bought all that stuff because let me tell you something. I didn't buy Kate Bosworth, in fucking Superman Returns. I didn't like her at all as Lois Lane. Yeah, Margot Kidder and Reeve had just a great chemistry together.
It was also really interesting casting because Margot Kidder at that point, I mean, she had done Black Christmas, which is, a holiday slasher film. She had done Sisters, which is a Brian De Palma slasher film. So she was kind of like sort of a proto scream queen, doing all these kind of low budget horror-esque movies. And then, to land Lois Lane, who is essentially the girl next door. And I think that's really why Superman gravitates towards her as a love interest and as a companion. Granted, she is a street smart girl next door, but physically, quality wise, yeah, she has this city girl quality that he doesn't get in Smallville.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's partly why he's enamored with her. And I feel like Margot Kidder, she just has that big city, fast talking, no nonsense reporter attitude about her that I think is very, very truthful to the character of Lois Lane.
But I totally agree on the fact that explaining the origin of Superman, especially in the 70s when maybe not everybody was aware about Superman, was a challenge to do it in 2 hours. I totally agree on that. But what I'm saying is it's the lack of ambition on the scenario. If you start the story with Clark in the Daily Planet, you have kind of a mystery about this guy. Why are we watching this guy? Why we want a superhero movie? So you create something like a confusion to the audience. And then with flashbacks, when you see Marlon Brando and everything, it would have been more entertaining for me instead of starting with the Krypton story. While I don't really get the point at the beginning because the baby, you see it at the third scene or something like that. So at the beginning, you're like, who's that old guy? And the trio with the three guys, they look like they left from a nasty party and they have a severe lack of vitamin D. You don't understand what's happening with them. And actually you understand that at the second opus. So you're like, okay, what the fuck? I mean, for me, I do see the point. It's just for me, you could have a more effective, impacting way to show it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that's that's one thing that I actually really love about this film is the very, very beginning. You have the criminals on Krypton, General Zod and company, and it doesn't become relevant until part 2, but they set it up at the beginning of part 1, and so when it comes back around, it's like, oh, because now you have that whole story of Superman and like why he's special and everything. And so now he's got 3 equal enemies coming after him. It's like it's just raising the stakes for the sequel, which really does hit the ground running. Like that's part of, I mentioned this in the video. It's like this film, it does take its time establishing everything because it is just the first half of the story. I mean, this is a modern mythological epic, really, when you get down to it. And so the first part is really the origin, and then the second part is like kind of the payoff and the delivery and just the constant conflict. Because part 2 really is like, it is a true continuation of this story. It's not like Friday the 13th or even Nightmare on Elm Street, like where they just retell the same story. Like this is like the second part of this like massive story of this character. And I've always loved and appreciated that about this first half of the original series, was the care that went into the crafting of the story.
And yeah, you advised me to watch the 2 movies to prepare this podcast, so I did so, and I agree with you. It makes sense. The story makes sense when you watch the 2 movies, but there is something that I didn't really get. I mean, I was surprised because I understood that the 2 movies were made together, but Lex Luthor, the character is not coherent. In when you watch the first one, he's super smart, but in the second one, he's so stupid in it. So it's like it's not written with the same team. It's not the same production doing this, because this character is not the same in the 2 movies. I mean, I feel that way. The character is not the same in the 2 movies.
So what happened was Richard Donner got fired after Superman 1, and then they brought in Richard Lester to finish Superman 2, and Richard Donner, he didn't want his name on it because he wasn't finishing the film and he had done so much. So Richard Lester had to film 51% of Superman 2. So they reshot a whole lot, which is why you should watch the Richard Donner cut, because it really is kind of it's a completely different movie. But Gene Hackman only ever worked with Richard Donner. He never came back for reshoots with Richard Lester. So any footage of Gene Hackman in Superman 2, the theatrical cut, was filmed by Richard Donner. That being said, if you watch the Richard Donner cut, you're going to see additional scenes of Gene Hackman. You're going to see additional scenes of Marlon Brando, who was not in Superman 2 at all. And that's why the Richard Donner cut is a superior film, even though it's not complete.
I don't even own the theatrical cut of 2. I only own the Richard Donner cut. I refuse to even acknowledge that movie's existence because it's shit.
Well, with that, you lose elements of the character and you lose scenes and context. At that point, they're kind of playing it up a little bit more of the camp value. And plus, in Superman 2, then it kind of becomes Superman against the supervillains, and Lex Luthor kind of falls by the wayside. So yeah, they do kind of turn him into a little bit of a patsy, but there's some stuff in there that just doesn't add up and doesn't make sense. And so if you watch the Richard Donner cut, you get a better sense of the picture and the film. Even though it's not complete and they do recycle some stuff, it's still, I think, a better presentation of the story as it was intended.
If you want to see how good of a director Richard Donner is, for this conversation, I hadn't watched the theatrical cut of 2 in a long time, and I watched the theatrical cut, and then I immediately put on Superman 2, Richard Donner's cut. Night and day. I mean, Richard Lester, he got a lot of credit for Superman 2 and what Richard Donner did in that film. You see what he does with his own devices and when he has Superman Part 3. The guy doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
A lot of people love Superman 2, and they don't realize that they love the Richard Donner side of it more than the Richard Lester. Richard Lester, because he's the sole credited director on 2, he gets all the credit and all the accolades for Part 2, but really, when you watch it compared to the Richard Donner cut, it is, what the hell, And then when you watch Part 3, it's like, oh shit. Okay, now I get it. So you almost have to suffer through Part 3 in order to fully understand what the fuck went wrong on Part 2.
Yeah, the Sulkine.
And what a tragedy it is to cinema and history.
Yeah. The Sulkines as producers were their own worst enemy.
I'll say this, Superman the movie is still, to this very sentence, one of my favorite, if not my favorite, superhero film, simply because it is the cornerstone of the superhero genre. It is the foundation that everything else is built on and everything else follows. And so, the same way that you would appreciate the original Frankenstein or Gone with the Wind or Wizard of Oz, any of the classics, this film is a true classic, not only in the superhero genre, but also in the action genre, the fantasy genre, and in the cinematic development of what we now know as the blockbuster. It's a tried and true classic that has all of the right ingredients in the correct proportions. And it's just a shame what happened to this series because it started off so strong. And then ego and pride and money and all those things that have no place in true creativity belong. And it's great that we can still enjoy it and that we have the Donner cut of Superman 2. It's a shame that we don't get more of this later on in the series and in the franchise. And even moving beyond this initial franchise, it's just, I don't think Superman has ever been as well done as it was in 1978.
Without a doubt.
And I'm going to leave it
Without
there.
a doubt. I agree with that.
That will about do it for us here today at the Visually Hidden Selects podcast. We will be discussing a completely different film next time, so be sure to head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe so you don't miss any future recommendations. You can catch Steven Bendler on Instagram over at Steve's Pop Culture Corner. Ann and I are also on Instagram as well as Letterboxd, so you can follow us there and check out what we've watched and see what we think. And until next time, look up in the sky.